Hello, I'm Q. Thanks for joining the Thoughts for Living podcast. We are committed to creating and publishing content that's useful to you. Here's this week's show.
Hello, and thank you for joining the Thoughts for Living podcast. Today is February the 22nd, 2024. And we're trying something new. This is our first time trying to do a live call-in podcast. We're using some technology here, Google Meets, and hopefully in the future, this might be one way that we can continue to reach out to our friends and supporters of Thoughts for Living. Also, if you'd like to find information that you could use further, please go to thoughtsforliving.com. There you will find media in various formats, video, audio, and text. And currently, we are still promoting our new children's book, We Are Humankind. So please feel free to go to thoughtsforliving.com, and we're sure that you'll find resources that would help you in your development, help you in your decision making, so that we might create a more sustainable world. Today, we want to continue the conversation that we've had, beginning with some current world events, as much as the genocide in Gaza has pervaded much of our news, and rightly so. We also want to talk about, or at least mention, that there has been another genocide that has been going on for some time. That genocide is taking place in the DRC, the Republic of the Congo, on the African continent. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware that the history of the Congo has been turbulent, to say the least, from being just a beautiful, lush, and resource-rich area with beautiful people and culture that was later colonized by the Belgians, and through further discovery of the rich mineral resources that are used in technological production of devices and platforms, the DRC is one of the world's most dehumanizing places, where genocide is taking place with children, women, and families. Some of what's happening there has to do with competing forces, multinational forces, and some forces local to the continent. Of course, European nations and are vying, or not just vying, have corporations that are extracting billions and billions of dollars worth of resources. China is there. Also, African countries are participating in its destabilization. Uganda is there. And other countries. And based on the mineral wealth alone, the people of the DRC should be the richest people on the earth. But that is not the case. Like colonization, like the genocide in Israel, the people of the Congo, the civilians, are fighting for their lives and are being exposed to chemicals and dangerous situations to try to eke out a living in their own homeland that is so rich. And this genocide, of course, has gone, quote unquote, under the radar because we're dealing with an African nation and African peoples. Likewise, our brothers and sisters in Gaza are experiencing inhumanity beyond belief. And sadly, our government initially sided wholeheartedly with the Zionist state in its genocidal attacks against Palestinian civilians. But since that time, through world protests, global protests, and due to protests of Arabs here in the U.S., the administration has seemingly is using rhetoric that would seek a ceasefire and rhetoric that would seem to speak to holding the Zionist state accountable for its actions against the civilian population, the Palestinians. Here we won't go through all of the devastation, but we are very clear about what colonization is. We're very clear about what colonization does. When Europeans or foreign entities come into a land that is already populated by other human beings, and then those who come in decide to take control of the land and the resources, and for that matter, also take advantage of the people. In those situations, and historically it has proven true, that when colonizers enter into another people's land, their goal is to exterminate. Their goal is to exterminate the people who live there. And that is conducted literally by actually attacking the civilians, the women and children, or it's done by being able to destroy the infrastructure that human beings need to live, destroying electrical grids, destroying plumbing, destroying houses, burning crops. And in other cases, colonization leads to starvation. And all of these different means can be used to do away with the original people in that space so that others can claim that area and those resources. This has been the case. This is what we've all become aware of happening in Gaza, which is basically an open-air prison. And we find similar behavior happening to our brothers and sisters, not only in Palestine, but our brothers and sisters in the Congo. One of the issues that has accompanied our awareness of colonization, our awareness of genocide taking place in our world, was we saw in the U.S. where protests on college campuses by students, Jewish and non-Jewish students, who raised their voices against the genocide that was taking place in Israel. We saw pushback on college campuses from elite wealthy donors who threatened the colleges and universities with no longer funding programs, supposedly because they tried to interpret the protest against the genocide committed by the Zionist state against Palestinian civilians as anti-Semitism. And that is nothing further from the truth. To protest for the rights of Palestinians, the rights of Palestinian self-determination, is not anti-Semitic. But there is an agenda that we've come to understand as being promoted by these elite wealthy donors who are trying to drive a wedge between Jewish people and Black people in this country, as we have historically have been allies, going back at least, and I'm sure further, but at least through the modern civil rights movement that began here in Montgomery, Alabama. Rabbi Herschel was a friend of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. There was Jewish support of the civil rights movement because those brothers and sisters saw the similarities between what they had experienced in terms of discrimination and in terms of being targeted, as was the case during the Holocaust. They knew and understood from their lived experience that what they were seeing being done to black people all across this country, and particularly in the South, was racist. And so there developed a relationship between Jewish people, African American people, and all other people who were fighting, who continued to fight for freedom, justice, and equity. And so the sleight of hand that these entities and these elite, wealthy donors are trying to get away with is that their argument that they're trying to make, that the problem is leftists. It's the left that's anti-Semitic. This is what they say. It's the left that's destroying our colleges and universities. This is what they say. But in actuality, the federal government, the FBI, tells us the major threat, internal threat in the United States are white supremacist organizations. And when we look at who these elements are, these rich elites and their think tanks and their allies, they are aligned with white supremacists. They are aligned with the MAGA movement. They are aligned with Claremont University, the Heritage Foundation. These other organizations, like PragerU, who really feel as though somehow whites are being victimized in a country that they control. Now, this initial, even though we're dealing now with DEI, but we must remember to put it in context that this arose initially with attacks on the 1619 Project, and afterwards an attack on critical race theory, which was led by a man named Christopher Rufo, who later began writing for the Manhattan Institute, which some would refer to as a right-wing organization, who also worked with an advisor to DeSantis in Florida, and who came in and wanted to undermine what they call leftist universities, and that they were teaching ideas that was contrary to America. But this was the argument that Rufo began, and it began as a falsehood, as a lie. because there was never any teaching of critical race theory in pre-K through 12th grade schools in the United States. But because Rufo started this argument, and basically the Republican conservatives needed a so-called wedge issue, a race issue, that they could get white supremacists, yes, people who have leanings toward white supremacy, or such innate hatred of black and brown people. So when they put this information, was put into rotation on Fox News, well, what came of that? Over 20 states immediately passed legislation banning the teaching of CRT, and it was never taught at the elementary or high school level. But what this became was an issue they could use. They created a false issue that they could galvanize the white supremacist base around. And so once they were able to use misinformation to convince white people and white supremacists to support bans as it related to critical race theory, then next Rufo and that ilk turned their attention to DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, why would anybody be against diversity, equity, and inclusion? When diversity is the default of life, if you simply, you can look around in your room. In this room, there's a chair, there's a pillow, there's a microphone, I got glasses and images behind me, microphone, different, that's diverse. That's what that word, that's the root word. And if you look outside your window, you see birds and trees, you see grass, you see squirrels. Or if you're in an urban area, you see cars and buses, traffic lights, people, tall people, short people. Diversity, difference, is the default of life. Everything in life and nature is different. All of life. So if you are against diversity, if you are against difference, which means all you want is one thing, which in this society is whiteness. You want everybody to be white, act white, speak white narratives. And if they do that, then evidently, in your worldview, they're okay. But that's not diversity. We're all humankind. And humankind is diverse. We come in different shades. We come in different cultures. We come with different ways of eating. We come with different ways of making music. We come with different ways of expressing ourselves. But we are all humankind. And so diversity is the default. Now, why would anybody be against diversity? And equity. Equity simply means that there should be a relationship between an equitable relationship or a somewhat similar relationship from an economic standpoint from those that have and those that have not. And I'm sure many of you have seen the posters and the images that they've used to describe the difference between equality and equity. Equity has as its heart not the old idea of equality, providing everybody with the same thing. Equity is a more targeted approach where you provide those, you have to look at what people need and you provide what's necessary for their needs, which might not be the same as some others who might be even similarly situated. Again, because we're all diverse, equity simply means that we don't use a one-size-fits-all approach. Because we're diverse, our approaches should then identify with our difference and embrace difference. You know, when colonization took place initially here on this continent, Europeans came here and they killed the native peoples here on Turtle Island. And all those that they didn't kill, they put them through Americanization programs. They had this idea of kill the Indian, but save the man. And so Europeans kidnapped native peoples and native people's children and cut their hair and stripped them of their clothes, their traditional clothing. Stripped them of their language and sent them away from their people to boarding schools, where you might have heard in the news, not only in the United States, but also in Canada, Native children were killed and abused. Why? Because whites did not honor diversity. They did not honor the difference, the beautiful difference of our native brothers and sisters. And rather than treat them equitably based on their circumstance and difference, they sought to make them just like white people to try to make Native people into their own image. Now, the last time I checked, that's something left to God. It is not in our interest at all to try to make other human beings into our image.
Well, as you can tell, we're all different. This helps me to think about my role as a woman of color, a wife, a mother, and what I can do to help create a world that is more sustainable for us all. If you're like me, subscribe to the channel and visit www.thoughtsforliving.com for more episode resources. Thank you for your support and email us with your thoughts for living.